The story opens in Heaven's celestial garden, where a 24-year-old man named Kazami Jinta suddenly regained his senses. Upon opening his eyes, he found himself sitting quietly on a plain chair in an unfamiliar, serene environment. Shortly after his awakening, a presence nearby informed him of his identity and the unfortunate truth of his situation. He was told that his life had ended abruptly in a sudden accident during his daily morning commute to work. He was asked to confirm if this detail was accurate, which prompted him to look closely at the person speaking to him. Standing before him was a breathtaking woman featuring striking blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Jinta felt deeply confused by the strange surroundings and the incredible sight before him. To clear his confusion, the young woman introduced herself as Rifua, the divine goddess who holds authority over life and death. Her declaration left Jinta completely stunned. She began to explain the nature of this mysterious realm, revealing that it was a transitional place where the final destination of every deceased soul was determined. She listed the possible choices for a soul, which included achieving peaceful nirvana, being reborn again into the same human world, or taking a completely new path through reincarnation into an entirely different world. After outlining these paths, she offered a polite apology for delivering such grim news and directly confirmed that he was indeed dead. Rather than falling into despair or sadness, Jinta reacted with immediate excitement and began to celebrate his own passing. His sudden outburst of pure joy startled the goddess, who wondered if the shock of dying had somehow damaged his mind. Jinta quickly explained his happiness by pointing out that death meant he would never have to wake up early for his exhausting daily job ever again. He was thrilled to permanently say goodbye to his miserable work life, his terrible jobs, and his unpleasant bosses, considering his demise to be the absolute best outcome possible. Embarrassed by his loud cheering, Rifua urged him to quiet down because the other souls and divine beings in the garden were staring directly at them. Jinta offered a quick apology, leaving the goddess to quietly ponder just how miserable and painful his former life on Earth must have been. Moving forward with the divine process, Rifua formally announced that his soul's destination had officially been decided, and he was scheduled to be sent directly to heaven. Jinta was surprised by this decision and asked if this meant he had achieved nirvana. The goddess confirmed that this was true, but Jinta immediately asked her to stop the process. He explained that he much preferred the option of being reborn into a brand new, different world, referring back to the choice she had mentioned earlier. Curious about his strange choice, the goddess inquired what he could possibly plan to do in a completely unfamiliar secondary world. Jinta revealed his ambitious personal goals without hesitation. He explained that his primary goal was to flirt with many beautiful women and build a massive harem. Beyond that, he desired status, high honor, and vast amounts of money. He wanted to achieve every single dream, luxury, and desire that he had been denied during his previous mundane life on Earth. Hearing his grand and selfish ambitions caused the goddess to burst into uncontrollable laughter. She openly mocked his ideas, telling him that such a foolish fantasy was completely impossible. Jinta defended his dream by mentioning that he had read many fantasy novels back on Earth, which made him believe that such an incredible lifestyle was entirely possible in a new world. Still chuckling at his innocence, Rifua explained the reality of reincarnation to him. She noted that nobody gets to choose their new form, and a completely ordinary person like him would be lucky to even be reborn as something useful, suggesting he might end up as nothing more than a single piece of disposable tissue paper. She advised him to throw away his foolish delusions and quickly accept his passage into heaven, explaining that she was a busy divine entity with no extra time to waste on his silly requests. Her mocking attitude angered Jinta, who suddenly shouted at her never to laugh at a man's serious dreams. In a desperate attempt to force his way, he reached out and firmly grabbed hold of the goddess's arm. Shocked by his sudden physical contact, Rifua demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Jinta demanded that she use her divine authority to send him to the secondary world immediately, but she insisted that she could not fulfill such a request. To force her hand, Jinta threatened to grope her chest if she refused to obey him. Rifua tried to reason with him, explaining that her refusal was not out of spite, but because randomly sending unprepared humans into other worlds creates massive divine problems and chaos. Unbothered by her explanation, Jinta shouted that he did not care about the consequences and renewed his threat to grab her chest. The goddess was shocked by his total lack of shame as his focus shifted entirely toward threatening her body. During the struggle, Jinta's eyes caught sight of a special divine control button nearby that was specifically designed to trigger reincarnation into another world. Realizing that this control panel was the key to choosing his next destination, he demanded that she quickly push it and send him away. When the goddess continued to refuse, Jinta decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed her tightly, restraining both of her arms so she could not break free or push him away. However, while holding her tightly by the arms, Jinta suddenly noticed something unexpected about her physical appearance. He realized that the goddess was completely flat-chested, lacking the soft features he had assumed she had. Feeling utterly tricked, he asked where his expected bouncy goddess had gone, loudly accusing her of hiding her physical form and calling it unfair deception. Rifua angrily defended herself, claiming that she was not that small, but Jinta ignored her complaints and continued to wrestle with her so he could reach the control panel and push the magical reincarnation button himself. In the middle of their chaotic physical struggle, the goddess lost her balance. As she tried to pull away from his grip, her foot accidentally kicked the forbidden button that controlled reincarnation into another world. The moment the button was pressed, a bright, glowing magic circle immediately manifested on the ground beneath Jinta's feet. Jinta looked down in absolute wonder as a holographic status board suddenly appeared directly in front of his eyes. The goddess stared in complete disbelief at the sudden turn of events, unable to stop what her accidental action had set in motion. A mysterious divine voice prompt echoed through the garden, announcing that the process of reincarnation into another world had officially begun. The magical energy surrounding the circle began to lift both Jinta and the goddess slightly off the ground, floating together in mid-air as the ultimate transformation took hold, officially sending the young man toward his brand new life in a fantasy realm. Jinta fell directly out of the open sky, complaining about the terrible and rough way he was being sent down to his new destination. As he plummeted toward the ground, he was completely amazed by the breathtaking view below him, even catching sight of a giant dragon soaring freely through the clouds. He realized that he had somehow managed to reach another world, though the experience felt far less like a peaceful rebirth and more like a chaotic drop. He quietly questioned if falling from the sky like a rock even counted as a proper reincarnation. Upon landing, he felt an uncomfortable and strange sensation underneath his backside. To his total surprise, he looked down and discovered that he had landed directly on top of a green goblin, killing the creature instantly with the heavy impact of his fall. Nearby, he noticed a shiny silver rock resting on the dirt. Deciding it looked valuable, he picked it up to keep for later. He then turned his attention to a floating status board that had been lingering in his vision since his arrival, wishing the divine entity was around so he could ask her a few questions about them. Looking over his numbers, he found his personal statistics to be completely bizarre. At that exact moment, the goddess crashed down from the sky, landing heavily right on top of him. Shocked to see him there, she stared at him while Jinta clumsily addressed her by her hair color before quickly correcting himself to address her as the goddess. He teased her by asking if she had followed him down to the mortal realm out of deep concern for his safety. She quickly denied his claim, angrily explaining that his chaotic behavior had dragged her into the transfer against her will. Surprised by this reveal, Jinta asked if she was unable to return to her heavenly realm. The goddess explained that something was terribly wrong because she could not contact the celestial world at all. She noted that she had been trying to send divine messages for some time, but none of them were connecting, which was an anomaly that had never occurred in all her years of existence. Jinta suggested that because he had forced his way through the process, a major system bug must have appeared in the transfer. To support his theory, he pointed out his own bizarre statistics, revealing that his luck attribute was listed at nearly 1 million points. The goddess rejected his claim, explaining that maximum attributes were normally capped at 99 points. She added that ordinary mortals were never supposed to view their own status boards in the first place. She stared directly at him to investigate, prompting Jinta to wonder what was wrong. The goddess admitted that she could not see his status screen at all. Jinta pointed out that he could see it clearly, mocking her inability by stating that a divine being should easily be able to peek at a mortal's attributes, further proving that a massive system error had occurred. The goddess stared at him with complete seriousness before bursting into a panic, demanding to know what a bug even was and how she was supposed to return to her home. Jinta remarked on how unpredictable the whole situation had become, which caused the goddess to break down in tears. She blamed him entirely for forcing the transfer button, but Jinta reminded her that her own foot had been the thing that actually pressed it. Trying to comfort her, he urged her to stop crying and sincerely apologized, explaining that he had never intended to drag her into his mess. Hearing his soft words, the goddess wiped away her tears and announced that she no longer cared about the immediate panic. Curiously, Jinta asked what she planned to do next. She reassured him that higher divine help would surely arrive eventually, and that she would simply kill time while waiting for a rescue. She advised Jinta to go ahead and live his own life as he pleased. Reluctant to leave her behind, Jinta invited her to travel alongside him. He took full responsibility for her situation and expressed a strong desire to make amends by looking after her until help arrived. The goddess studied his friendly smile, asking if he was truly certain about his choice, warning him that traveling together meant she would immediately abandon him the moment her rescuers showed up. Jinta casually dismissed her warning, stating that he would deal with that problem when the time came. He added that leaving a crying woman all by herself went directly against his personal goals for this new life. The goddess scoffed at his dramatic words, denying that she had been crying at all. However, she agreed to stay by his side for a little while since he had insisted so strongly. She offered him a genuine smile, expressing curiosity about how he intended to make up for getting her stuck on Earth, officially joining his party as his new traveling companion. During their journey on foot, the divine entity found herself attempting to address her male companion, though she hesitated, uncertain of the appropriate name to use until he instructed her to simply call him Jinta. In turn, she offered her own name, Rifua, for him to use. Pausing briefly as she gathered her thoughts, she recalled what she had intended to convey and advised him that remaining in her presence, even for a short duration, was an exceptional stroke of good fortune for him. When he playfully questioned whether this privilege stemmed from her appealing appearance, a vivid blush instantly flushed across her face. Flustered, she hastily clarified that her remark had nothing to do with vanity, but rather referred to her immense reservoir of wisdom concerning the surrounding realm. She proudly claimed complete mastery over the world's geography, landscapes, indigenous creatures, standard customs, and even the most obscure and complex branches of knowledge. To demonstrate her vast familiarity with the region, she directed his attention toward a specific vantage point, pointing out a modest settlement in the distance, known as the town of Hanan, and suggesting that they make it their initial destination. Observing the distant location, Jinta acknowledged her impressive grasp of world affairs, a compliment she accepted as natural given her exalted status as a goddess. She generously invited him to consult her whenever he required information, an offer he accepted while addressing her with exaggerated reverence as he prepared to inquire about a strange object he had recently acquired. Noticing his teasing tone, Rifua suspected he was poking fun at her, though her focus quickly shifted when he produced a mysterious stone for her examination. Upon inspecting the artifact, she recognized it as a magical crystal known as a core, an item occasionally dropped by defeated monsters whose value and quality could be determined by its distinct coloration. Her composure vanished into sheer astonishment as she realized the object possessed a brilliant silver hue. Expressing disbelief at the extraordinary discovery, she demanded to know where he had obtained such an item, to which he casually explained that he had retrieved it from beneath the corpse of a goblin he had inadvertently slain moment prior. Faced with her utter shock, Jinta asked whether a silver classification possessed any genuine rarity. She confirmed that it was exceptionally scarce, explaining the hierarchy of core ranks where gold occupied the third tier, silver held the prestigious second tier, and rainbow represented the absolute pinnacle of rarity. She estimated that if he were to liquidate the silver crystal at a local market, its value would easily reach a minimum of 100,000 rin, an amount roughly equivalent to 100,000 yen, and she praised him warmly for his remarkable luck. Jinta admitted that despite her explanation, the monetary value felt somewhat abstract and difficult to comprehend. Rifua reinforced the gravity of his fortune by emphasizing that under ordinary circumstances, an adventurer would need to isolate themselves inside a dangerous dungeon for months on end just to encounter a single core of that caliber. Grasping the situation through that comparison, Jinta remarked that finding the equivalent of 100,000 currency units casually lying on the ground was indeed an extraordinary occurrence. With this newfound wealth in mind, Jinta realized that the substantial payout meant Rifua would no longer be forced to camp outdoors for the night. Surprised by his consideration, she asked if he truly intended to use the funds for that purpose, and he firmly reassured her that he felt obligated to take care of her expenses as a gesture of gratitude for her assistance. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Rifua offered a warm smile and expressed her sincere appreciation. Deciding it was time to move forward, Jinta suggested they immediately set off for the distant town she had mentioned earlier. Before they departed, Rifua reminded him to safely store the valuable silver crystal inside his specialized item box, promising to guide him through the process of utilizing the spatial storage capability as they walked. Following her instructions, they eventually arrived at the imposing entrance of the settlement, where Rifua formally introduced the location as the town of Hanan. Jinta expressed genuine awe at the sight, observing as they strolled through the streets that the surroundings possessed a charmingly exotic atmosphere, while Rifua noted with pleasant surprise that the community was far more vibrant and bustling than she had originally anticipated. Their journey soon led them to a commercial establishment, where the loud, sharp ring of a metallic counter echoed through the shop as a transaction was finalized. Holding the earned currency in his hands, Jinta remarked on the successful sale, marveling at the fact that they had indeed received the exact sum of 100,000 rin, just as she had predicted. Rifua accepted the validation with pride, attributing the accurate forecast to her own grandeur, while Jinta expressed relief that he had taken the time to retrieve the stone from the ground. Curious about their remaining inventory, Rifua inquired whether he had salvaged any other valuable items from his encounter, to which Jinta jokingly replied that he had found nothing else of value except perhaps her undergarments, before swiftly shifting the conversation toward locating suitable lodging for the night. Taken aback by his sudden, mischievous remark, Rifua called out to him in confusion, demanding that he clarify what he had just said. though he casually repeated his intent to search for a comfortable place to sleep. Before their playful exchange could continue, their attention was abruptly drawn toward a dramatic scene unfolding nearby on the street. A distressed woman was desperately pleading with a man, crying out as she attempted to physically pull him away from a nearby installation, begging him to stop and reminding him that he was about to squander their family's entire monthly living allowance. Unmoved by her tearful entreaties, the man harshly ordered his wife to remain silent, insatiably insisting that he only needed to play the machine one more time to turn his fortunes around. Watching the commotion unfold with confusion, Jinta inquired about the nature of the device the man was obsessed with, prompting Rifua to explain that the apparatus was an item gacha machine, a popular and risky form of public gambling. Rifua went on to clarify that the device was a mechanism housing a vast collection of monster cores, allowing a player to pull a random stone whose color determined the specific prize they could claim in exchange. Because the outcome was entirely unpredictable, Jinta observed that winning depended solely on a person's fortune. Rifua agreed, reiterating that this uncertainty was precisely why it was called an item gacha. She pointed out that while the potential rewards included exceedingly valuable luxury goods, the vast majority of the items obtained were virtually worthless trash. Astonished by this revelation, Jinta inquired whether anyone actually managed to win anything of value. Rifua confirmed that winners did exist, though the odds were extraordinarily slim, requiring an immense amount of luck to secure a top prize. Hearing this, Jinta let out a subtle smile, concluding that as long as someone possessed exceptional luck, victory was within reach. Stepping inside the gambling establishment, Jinta was followed closely by Rifua, who anxiously questioned whether he was truly certain about proceeding. He reassured her that he merely wished to attempt a single draw. Examining the displayed rules, he noted that a single turn cost 1,000 rin. Rifua strongly protested, warning him that he would only end up with useless junk and emphasizing that the item gacha was notoriously addictive, making it the most dangerous form of gambling in the entire world. Jinta urged her to remain calm and put her trust in him. When she pressed him on the source of his boundless confidence, he turned to her with a smile, remarking that he had nothing to fear since he was accompanied by an actual goddess. Their exchange drew light-hearted chuckles from the surrounding patrons who overheard them. Approaching the counter, Jinta requested a single attempt from the cashier. The clerk informed him that paying 10,000 rin would grant him 11 total attempts, asking if he still preferred to play just once. Nearby gamblers chimed in, with one man whispering a recommendation to take the 10,000 rin deal, and another seated patron agreeing that he would inevitably end up playing multiple times anyway. Rifua gently tugged at Jinta, silently pleading with him to walk away. Looking back at the clerk, Jinta firmly declined the bulk offer and reiterated his desire for a single draw. The cashier handed him his single token. As he stepped up to the machine, Jinta reflected on Rifua's earlier words about being grateful for his fortune, deciding that this single attempt would serve as the ultimate test of his capabilities. He aimed to prove whether his extraordinarily high luck stat was a genuine trait rather than a temporary display error. Inserting the token, he turned the mechanism and waited in suspense for the result. Suddenly, a ringing bell resounded throughout the hall, and the cashier loudly announced that the player had hit the special grand prize. Surrounding onlookers gasped in utter disbelief as Jinta celebrated his incredible victory. Staring at the output in shock, Rifua asked if she was truly seeing a rainbow core, the absolute rarest tier in existence. Jinta smiled knowingly, reminding her that he had told her to trust him, inwardly confirming that his stats truly granted him the absurd power of nearly 1 million luck. The cashier warmly congratulated him on his impossible fortune, officially presenting him with Levitine, the legendary special reward designated for pulling the coveted rainbow core. The following morning, rumors spread rapidly through the interior of a local restaurant regarding the individual who had successfully won the legendary Levitine sword from the gacha machine. One customer lamented that he had been relentlessly aiming to secure that specific blade for years, while his companion agreed, expressing confidence that possessing such a weapon would have made defeating a behemoth a trivial task. Sitting nearby and overhearing the surrounding conversation while enjoying their meal, Rifua remarked to Jinta that they appeared to have become the main topic of conversation throughout the entire settlement. Jinta agreed as he quietly inspected the item description of the weapon. The SSSR Levitine was listed as a divine blade capable of slaying demon gods, granting its wielder substantial parameter boosts including 4,000 health points, 3,000 mana points, 2,000 strength, and 1,500 intelligence. Acknowledging these extraordinary attributes, Jinta noted that it truly was a remarkable weapon. Rifua reinforced his reaction, explaining that as an SSSR rank, it represented the highest tier of rarity and could easily fetch a price of hundreds of millions if sold. Upon hearing the immense potential value, Jinta was left speechless in absolute shock, though he quickly reasoned that selling such a rare item would be a tremendous waste. Surprised by his hesitation, Rifua asked if he truly intended to keep it, reminding him that the sword was historically wielded by the former hero to defeat the Demon King before becoming an untamed relic circulating through the world. She added with certainty that he would never be able to meet the requirements to wield it himself. Jinta countered that they could not be entirely sure until he attempted to use it, resolving to decide its ultimate fate only after conducting a practical test. Rifua warned him that prize winners were frequently targeted by ruthless robbers, advising that liquidating the item for money was the far safer decision. Their discussion was briefly interrupted when a waitress arrived with their order of pinigo for dessert, expressing gratitude for their patience. Spotting the sweet treat, Rifua reacted with visible excitement, prompting Jinta to ask if it was a favorite of hers, which she happily confirmed. Later that evening inside their rented room, a satisfied Rifua lay back on the bed, mentioning that she was completely full from dinner. Jinta agreed, commenting on the impressive quality of the local cuisine. Shifting the topic, Rifua noted that she had been unable to establish a connection back to the celestial realm since her arrival, before asking Jinta about his future plans and whether he still intended to pursue a career as an adventurer. Jinta contemplated the prospect of fighting monsters and hunting for rare treasure, concluding that taking up the profession would be the most efficient path toward rising through the ranks of society. While Rifua cautioned him that the lifestyle carried immense personal risk, Jinta replied that he was fully prepared to accept those dangers to achieve his personal ambitions. Reassuring him, Rifua declared that he could remain at ease because no harm would come to them as long as he was under her protection, promising to share all her vast knowledge so he could navigate the world safely. She proudly reminded him that she was a level 999 entity, holding the title of the absolute strongest goddess. Looking at her status window, Jinta reacted with deep confusion. When Rifua asked what was wrong, Jinta expressed sincere gratitude for her protective offer, but gently pointed out that her actual numerical stats were roughly equivalent to the weak goblin he had slain earlier that afternoon. Horrified by the claim, Rifua insisted it was impossible and demanded that he look closer, before accidentally smacking her own head in frustration. To her utter shock, the mild, self-inflicted tap dealt significant damage to her health pool, leading Jinta to speculate that her weakened state was likely a side effect or glitch caused by her forceful transfer into the mortal realm. Overwhelmed by the realization, Rifua collapsed back onto the mattress, declaring that she no longer cared to think about it. A short while later, Jinta quietly slipped out of the room. Noticing his departure at such a late hour, the inn's receptionist inquired where he was heading. Jinta admitted that he was having difficulty sleeping, privately realizing that trying to rest with a girl sleeping right beside him made it nearly impossible to keep calm. He informed the attendant that he was simply taking a brief night stroll to clear his head and would return shortly. Walking through the quiet streets outside the inn, Jinta decided that since he had uninterrupted time to himself, it was the perfect opportunity to test the capabilities of the Levantine. Passing a sleeping guard near the town boundary, he noted that the lack of witnesses made his task much easier. He navigated toward a nearby open space, deciding the area was secluded enough for his experiment. Accessing his item box, a specialized spatial pocket used to store personal belongings, he retrieved the dark sword and drew it from its sheath. Despite Rifua's insistence that the legendary blade would be unusable for him, the weapon felt perfectly comfortable in his hands. Recalling that the item description listed several magical techniques attached to the blade, Jinta selected the spell known as Dark Filament to test first. Acknowledging to himself that fighting actual monsters was still a terrifying prospect, he carefully aimed the tip of the sword toward a massive boulder sitting in the open clearing. Unsure of the precise method to channel the spell, Jinta held the dark blade steadily in his hands until a glowing magic circle suddenly manifested beneath his feet. Unleashing the Dark Filament technique, an immense wave of magical force burst forth from the weapon, sending a shockwave so powerful that the recoil knocked him directly onto the ground. Marveling at how effortlessly the spell had discharged, he realized this was his very first experience witnessing and wielding true magic. Before he could process the sensation, a deafening roar erupted from the target in the clearing, only for the magnificent creature to collapse and instantly perish. Staring at the massive form in sheer astonishment, Jinta realized that the giant object he had aimed at was not a boulder at all, but rather a slumbering dragon that he had inadvertently slain with a single strike. Inspecting the fallen creature's status window, Jinta realized that the massive target was not a boulder at all, but rather the feared lord of the plains, a colossal behemoth. Staring at the massive corpse, he felt a sudden chill, recognizing the terrifying power of the sword that could slay such a legendary monster with a single strike. As he surveyed the scene, a subtle glint on the ground caught his attention. Upon closer inspection, he discovered another silver core left behind by the creature. He carefully gathered the silver crystal along with the monster's giant horn and scales, wondering if these high-grade materials would fetch a generous price at the local shop. Satisfied with his spoils, he began his walk back toward the inn, feeling an intense physical sluggishness settle over his body. He reasoned that unleashing such grand magic had drained his mana reserves, reminding himself to exercise greater caution in the future, though he admitted the exhaustion would at least grant him a peaceful night's rest. Upon opening the door to their room, he was immediately greeted by Rifua, who demanded to know where he had gone. Noticing the glistening tears filling her eyes, Jinta calmly explained that he had simply stepped outside for a short stroll. Rifua raised her voice in distress, scolding him for disappearing without a word and confessing how deeply worried she had been. Jinta offered a sincere apology, gently asking if something had frightened her. Sniffling, Rifua admitted she had panicked, believing he had abandoned her and departed for good. Jinta teasingly asked if she was truly weeping over such a misunderstanding, but Rifua stubbornly insisted she was not crying at all. Affectionately patting her head, Jinta labeled her a little crybaby while reassuring her that he had no intention of ever leaving her behind. Rifua continued to deny her tears, boldly claiming she had not shed a single one, which prompted Jinta to playfully encourage her to just admit the truth. Reaching out, Rifua tightly gripped his clothing, pleading with him never to leave without informing her again. Jinta agreed, asking her to calm down and step back. In the sudden movement, Jinta lost his balance and tumbled backward onto the bed, accidentally pulling Rifua down with him. The sudden impact caused their faces to collide, resulting in an unexpected kiss. Shocked by the sudden intimacy, both of their faces instantly flushed a deep, bright red. Flustered, Rifua stammered that the situation was a complete accident, but before she could say more, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, forcing her to collapse onto her own mattress. Recognizing her exhaustion, Jinta suggested it was time for rest, and Rifua weakly agreed before drifting off. Lying in the dark, Jinta reflected on her tearful reaction, realizing the sheer weight of her anxiety. She had been abruptly summoned to an unfamiliar world alongside him, only to have her goddess stats glitched down to level 1, leaving her utterly vulnerable. When morning arrived, Rifua slowly woke up from her deep sleep. Jinta offered a warm morning greeting, which she softly returned while rubbing her eyes. She admitted that her memories of the previous night felt strangely hazy, asking Jinta if anything noteworthy had occurred after his return. Caught off guard by her memory lapse, Jinta hastily suggested they wash their faces before discussing anything further. Over a warm breakfast downstairs, Rifua formally announced her decision to support Jinta in his journey to become a certified adventurer. She explained that since she had no immediate way to return to the celestial realm, relying entirely on his generosity without contributing felt unacceptable to her. Although Jinta insisted he did not mind looking after her, Rifua firmly maintained her stance, asking him to accept her assistance. Yielding to her determination, Jinta noted that her vast knowledge of the world's geography and mechanics would be an invaluable asset to him. Pleased with his acceptance, Rifua reached out, taking his hand in a firm handshake and smiling warmly as she declared they would do their absolute best together, a sentiment Jinta happily echoed. A short time later, while discussing his recent outing, Rifua gasped in absolute disbelief upon hearing Jinta claim he had defeated a behemoth single-handedly. She dismissed his statement as a wild joke, emphasizing that the behemoth was an extraordinarily dangerous apex monster that had previously wiped out the Crescent Lights Union, a renowned rank 4 monster hunting guild. She insisted that such a beast was far beyond the capabilities of a single person. In response, Jinta retrieved the giant horn from his spatial inventory and handed it over. Rifua stared in total shock at the massive size of the horn, recognizing without a doubt that it belonged to a genuine behemoth, forcing her to accept that he had indeed slain the creature. Astonished, she demanded to know how he had achieved such a feat. Jinta casually explained that he had drawn the sword, aimed a spell at what he assumed was a giant rock, and unleashed an explosion that instantly vaporized the target. Rifua gasped, asking if he meant he had successfully wielded the legendary levitine. Jinta confirmed that he had used it without experiencing any issues at all. Rifua found this baffling, explaining that the cursed weapon was famous for being impossible to even unsheath, yet Jinta had drawn it effortlessly. Setting the mystery aside for the moment, Jinta mentioned his plan to visit the local merchant shop to sell the behemoth's horn and monster scales, inviting Rifua to accompany him. She readily agreed, joining him on the walk to the trade station. Inside the commercial shop, the female shopkeeper stared at the massive materials in sheer disbelief, shouting in utter amazement as she asked Jinta if he had truly slain a behemoth all by himself. The shopkeeper expressed her sheer disbelief, remarking that while it was nearly impossible to accept, Jinta clearly was no ordinary individual. She confirmed that the behemoth horn and scales were unquestionably genuine, though she apologized, explaining that she lacked the authority and funds to purchase high-grade monster parts directly. Instead, she advised him to visit the Adventurer Guild first, assuring him that properly registering his kill as an official quest completion would guarantee a substantial reward. Rifua chimed in, recalling that an active subjugation quest for the behemoth had indeed been posted. Smiling warmly, The shopkeeper provided Jinta with an official material appraisal document, explaining that having certified paperwork would streamline his reporting process at the guild. Jinta accepted the document with sincere gratitude. Before they could depart, Lifa interjected, suggesting that Jinta purchase a fresh set of clothes. When he asked for the reason, she pointed out that a distinct, lingering burnt odor seemed to cling to his outfit. Seeing an opportunity, the shopkeeper enthusiastically offered to style him in modern attire, promising to make him look exceedingly sharp. A short while later, after trying on the new outfit, the shopkeeper beamed with delight, declaring that the attire suited him perfectly. She explained that the garments were crafted by the prestigious Universe Clothing Union, representing the absolute latest trend popular among the younger generation. Unaccustomed to such fashion, Jinta turned to Lifa to ask for her opinion, anxiously inquiring whether the stylish ensemble appeared odd on him. Seeing her stunned expression, the shopkeeper stepped in to admire how handsome he looked. Recovering her composure, Lifa let out a soft laugh, teasingly remarking that clothes truly do make the man. She playfully added that since a faint scent still lingered, the issue had clearly been his own personal hygiene rather than his old garments. Jinta smiled warmly at her jab, softening her tone. A slightly flustered Lifa shyly admitted that he genuinely looked quite cool. Jinta thanked her for the compliment, prompting the shopkeeper to chuckle fondly at their sweet interaction, commenting on how wonderful it was to be young. As they stepped outside the shop, a group of seasoned adventurers passing by cast scheming glances toward them, smirking as their eyes locked onto the impressive sword strapped to Jinta's side. Inspecting the stat additions granted by the SSSR Levitine sword, which included increases of 3,000 health points, 3,000 mana points, 2,000 attack power, 3,000 intelligence, and 2 distinct magical skills, Lifa remarked that while defeating a behemoth single-handedly was already astonishing, the bonuses provided by the blade were 10 times greater than its standard base parameters. Jinta reacted with genuine surprise at her revelation. To test her theory, Lifa took hold of the weapon and asked Jinta to examine her status window. Viewing her parameters, Jinta observed that her stats had indeed increased, but only by 1/10 of the massive boost he had received while holding the same blade. He confirmed that equipping the sword granted him 10 times the statistical increase that anyone else received. Lifa wondered aloud why such a discrepancy existed, prompting Jinta to speculate whether his absurd luck stat played a role in the amplification. Lifa explained that under normal circumstances, luck had no direct impact on the base performance of equipment, suggesting that a completely broken or maxed out luck stat might be creating a unique anomaly. Jinta admitted that he still found the underlying mechanics confusing. Returning the blade to him, Lifa admitted that simply holding the powerful item made her feel unsettled. Shifting her focus, Lifa brought up their next destination, revealing that she had a specific location in mind that she urgently wished to visit. Arriving shortly after at the local gacha establishment, they were warmly greeted by the receptionist. Jinta expressed mild disbelief that out of all the places in town, she had chosen to return to the gambling hall. Lifa defended her choice, excitedly insisting that she wanted to try her luck at pulling a prize as well. Curious about her intentions, Jinta asked if there was a specific reward she was pursuing. Lifa confirmed that she had been eyeing a particular prize on the display board since the previous day, eagerly pointing toward a poster advertising a luxurious lakeside house. She emphasized the practical importance of the reward, pointing out that relying on temporary inn lodgings was not a sustainable long-term living arrangement. Jinta cautioned her that the residence was categorized as a high-tier gold-class prize, making it extremely difficult to obtain. Undeterred, Lifa countered that they would never know the outcome unless they attempted it, pleading with Jinta to let her play just once. Remembering his own success, Jinta relented and handed her the necessary currency, bringing a joyful smile to her face. Before she stepped up to the machine, Jinta offered to share some of his extraordinary luck with her to boost her odds. Lifa immediately rejected the offer, accusing him of harboring indecent motives and insisting she had no need for his suspicious, bugged powers. She winked playfully, declaring that she would demonstrate the authentic power of a true goddess instead. 10 minutes later, Lifa was in visible tears of frustration, desperately pleading for more money to continue rolling. She frantically claimed that a single additional attempt would guarantee the target prize, but Jinta scolded her for her lack of restraint, pointing out that she had already failed 10 consecutive times despite promising to play only once. Inspecting the heap of low-tier items she had accumulated, Jinta listed out the useless trash she had won, including plain pebbles gathered from the fields, scraps of mossy cloth, flimsy sticks only suitable for drawing in the dirt, and a single piece of tissue paper. He teasingly asked if she had simply succumbed to a full-blown gambling addiction. Lifa hastily denied his accusation, insisting that was not the case at all. Seeing her streak of poor results, Jinta asked if she would mind letting him take a turn at the machine instead, reasoning that as long as they secured the lakeside house, it mattered little who actually pulled the winning token. Sensing her subtle reluctance, Jinta recognized that she desperately wanted the personal satisfaction of winning the grand residence herself. Rifua sheepishly admitted her true anxiety, confessing she worried that if Jinta was the one who pulled the prize, he might claim sole ownership of the house and treat her as an unwanted guest. Reassurance washed over Jinta as he placed his hands on her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes and promising that if he won the residence, it would belong to both of them to share together. Overwhelmed by his sincere gesture, Rifua softly agreed to let him proceed. A sudden realization hit Jinta that his romantic framing might have sounded like a grand proposal, causing him to instantly panic. Overhearing the heartwarming exchange, the receptionist cheerfully congratulated the pair on their sweet relationship. Flustered, Jinta quickly attempted to clarify the situation, stammering that the employee had completely misconstrued their interaction. The receptionist recognized Jinta from his previous visit, praising his astonishing win from the day before as a brilliant display of beginner's luck. Realizing she could tell it had been his very first attempt at the machine, Jinta listened as she explained that making a single, isolated attempt was a classic pattern among first-time players. The clerk then asked if they were returning today, specifically to target the lakeside house. Jinta confirmed their goal, explaining that his companion had her heart set on securing the property before handing over a single 1,000 rin payment for one draw. Surprised by his modest approach, the receptionist recommended investing 10,000 rin for a bulk attempt instead, warning him that beginner's luck rarely struck twice in a row. Confident in his abilities, Jinta politely declined the offer, stating that he would win the house normally on a single draw. Impressed by his calm composure, the receptionist expressed her hope that he would succeed. Jinta smiled confidently, declaring that victory was guaranteed, while Rifua cheered him on enthusiastically from behind, voicing her full support for him to pull the coveted gold prize. Laughing off the high expectations, Jinta modest noted that he was merely turning the crank to release a capsule. Nearby, another employee remarked quietly to a colleague that if the young man managed to secure another top reward, the hall would be completely emptied of its grand prizes. The second worker reassured them, stating that extraordinary miracles rarely repeated themselves so easily. However, as the mechanism clicked and a single capsule rolled out into the tray, both employees stared at the result in absolute shock. Misinterpreting their intense gaze, Jinta grew concerned and offered an apology to Rifua, suspecting he had missed the intended reward and drawn something irrelevant. Inspecting the output, he held up a bright, yellowish stone. Rifua stared at the brilliant object in disbelief before declaring that it was indeed a gold core. Struggling to process his own fortune, Jinta asked if he had genuinely won the grand prize. He held out the shining core to show the receptionist, but the clerk remained completely frozen in place, utterly overwhelmed by the impossible display of luck before losing her balance and collapsing directly to the floor. At the town gate, Jinta remained in complete disbelief over their incredible fortune in winning an entire house. Rifua interrupted his thoughts to announce that she had successfully hired a carriage, explaining that the vehicle would take them directly toward the nearby lake. As they settled in and began their journey, the old driver shared a piece of local news with them. He explained that up until the previous day, traveling through this particular area was practically impossible due to a notoriously dangerous dragon known as a behemoth that roamed the region. However, the driver reassured them that the threat was no longer an issue, as local rumors suggested the terrifying beast had been killed during the middle of the night. Jinta tried to check if Rifua had heard this surprising news, but she simply remained silent and stared quietly out the carriage window. Noticing her strange behavior, Jinta asked if she was feeling well. Rifua admitted that she was feeling quite sick, expressing her surprise at how violently the carriage shook as it traveled along the road. Jinta encouraged her to hold on and endure the discomfort, silently noting to himself that they had barely even begun their trip. Suddenly, the horses came to an abrupt halt, leaving the old driver completely shocked. Jinta tried to figure out what was happening, and the driver pointed out that several aggressive men were standing directly outside, blocking their path. One of the men outside began shouting loudly, ordering the passengers inside the cart to step out immediately. Jinta climbed out of the carriage to investigate the situation and ask what they wanted. The leader of the group explained that they had watched Jinta win the property over at the gacha parlor earlier, which prompted them to travel ahead and set up an ambush along the road. Watching their dramatic behavior, Jinta could not help but think that these bandits were acting like completely predictable cliches. Assuming their intentions, Jinta guessed that they were after the keys to his newly acquired house. However, the leader quickly dismissed that idea with contempt, claiming he had no interest in owning a cheap shack located near an unpleasant lake. Instead, the leader pointed directly toward the weapon hanging at Jinta's side, revealing his true motive. He was targeting the famous hero's magic blade, surprising Jinta with the fact that they recognized such a legendary weapon. The leader mockingly explained that Jinta was foolish to think no one would notice him openly showing off such an extraordinary sword at his hip. He boasted about his sharp eyesight, adding that a legendary weapon like that would fetch an enormous amount of money on the black market. Before the conversation could go any further, one of the leader's men called out to draw attention to Rifua, whom he had already managed to grab and bind securely by the arms. The bandit praised her appearance, noting that she was remarkably beautiful, even if she did not have a particularly large chest. The leader walked over to inspect Rifua closely, declaring that a beauty like her would be extremely entertaining to play with. He reached out to hold her chin, admiring her fierce scowl and the cold, dismissive look she gave him. The leader openly expressed how much he enjoyed her strong, defiant attitude. Another bandit quickly pulled Rifua closer, which caused the leader to suddenly change his mind about his original plan. Turning back to Jinta, the leader announced that he had decided he wanted the house after all. Jinta was confused by this sudden change of heart and questioned the sudden demand. The leader glanced back at Rifua and explained that he would now be needing a private place for them to stay. He noted that the isolated property near the lake was actually perfect for his new plans, given that virtually no one ever visited that area. The leader mockingly assured Jinta not to worry, promising that he and his men would take very good care of Rifua from now on. Hearing this, Jinta began walking toward the men. He admitted to himself that if they had simply demanded the sword, he had been seriously considering just giving it up to avoid any unnecessary conflict. However, Jinta firmly rejected their demands and openly called the entire group a bunch of morons. The leader instantly grew furious at the insult, declaring that Jinta clearly did not value his own life. On his command, all of the surrounding bandits quickly closed in and encircled Jinta, leaving Rifua deeply terrified as she helplessly watched the situation unfold. One of the bandits warned the others not to panic over the presence of the magical sword. Another man agreed, insisting there was nothing to be afraid of. The leader joined in, claiming the weapon was actually a useless piece of junk that could not even be drawn from its scabbard, serving as nothing more than a valuable antique. Ignoring their taunts, Jinta firmly grabbed the hilt of his weapon and drew the legendary blade completely effortlessly. Without hesitation, Jinta executed a powerful sword technique known as Ash, unleashing a massive surge of concentrated energy from the blade. The leader watched in absolute disbelief as Jinta swung the weapon, declaring his intent to unleash its full power against people as wicked as them. Everyone present was frozen in complete shock by the devastating wave of power that burst forth from the sword. The sheer force of the attack sliced deeply into the solid ground, sending all of the bandits crashing violently to the dirt from the massive impact. The leader was left thoroughly horrified as he stared at the giant tear Jinta had just carved into the earth. The panicked bandits began shouting at their leader, complaining that facing such immense power was never part of their original agreement. Meanwhile, Jinta stood holding his weapon, looking down at the immense destruction in quiet surprise. He admitted to himself that he had only intended to perform a light, simple swing, completely unprepared for the terrifying amount of force the magical blade had actually released. Jinta called out to the boss, asking what was wrong and reminding him of his earlier boast about taking all of his winnings. He mockingly questioned if the man was just going to keep sitting helplessly on the ground. Terrified by the display of power, the boss immediately scrambled to his feet and fled alongside his men. The bandits ran away like frightened children, screaming apologies as they scattered into the distance. With the threat gone, Jinta turned his attention back to Rifua and assured her that the danger was over. To his surprise, Rifua was in tears, which confused him since she had looked ready to collapse from motion sickness just moments before. The coachman let out a heavy sigh of relief as the tension faded. Jinta gently asked Rifua if she had been scared or if she was worried about being carried off by the bandits, encouraging her that she did not need to cry anymore. However, Rifua stubbornly denied that she was crying at all, leaving Jinta amazed that she was still insisting on being tough after everything that had just happened. In truth, Rifua was internally replaying Jinta's heroic stand, misinterpreting his strong words as a fierce declaration to protect her from anyone who tried to harm her. Noticing the strange, overwhelmed look on her face, Jinta asked what was wrong. Rifua quickly grabbed Jinta's hands, brushing off her reaction by claiming it was nothing, and sincerely thanked him for saving her. Jinta urged her to get back into the carriage so they could resume their journey, promising to have the driver go at a much slower pace this time so her stomach would not get upset again. Walking together through the deep and shadowy forest, Rifua questioned whether a house could truly exist so far away from civilization. Jinta reassured her, mentioning that the old driver of their carriage had claimed it was located somewhere in this exact area. Not long after, Rifua caught sight of the structure through the trees and excitedly pointed it out. They both stood before the residence in quiet awe. Upon stepping inside, they discovered a pristine interior equipped with a full set of furniture. Rifua gazed around the space with widened eyes, taking in every detail. Sensing her wonder, Jinta asked if the place met her approval, to which she enthusiastically affirmed her love for the home, sharing that she had always dreamed of living in a setting just like this one. She noted how remarkably clean and fresh the forest air felt, stepping closer to the window to admire the surrounding landscape. While taking in the scenery, Rifua suddenly froze in place. Jinta walked over to look out the window as well, offering a slight smile at the unexpected view outside. He remarked on how rare such a sight was, noting that this was certainly not something one would ever encounter back in Japan. Outside stood a live-in dragon, turning the wooden, two-story house, complete with its separate bath and shower facilities located a half-day walk from the nearest town, into a rather unusual living situation. Exasperated by his casual reaction, Rifua expressed her frustration, questioning how he could possibly view a wild monster as an attractive house feature. Right at that moment, the creature let out a mighty roar, startling Rifua. Shaken by the loud noise, she urged Jinta to step up and handle the situation immediately. Jinta headed outside to confront the beast, pointing out that taking action was easier said than done. He activated his appraisal ability to examine the monster's status window, discovering that the creature was a level 16 fire dragon child possessing strong baseline stats. Jinta calculated that his own strength was slightly superior, giving him a reasonable chance to handle the threat, though he found himself caught off guard by the fact that the beast was merely a young dragon. Listening from safety, Rifua reflected on his level, wondering aloud what his actual stats were. Jinta revealed that he had already reached level 18. Rifua was taken aback by how rapidly he had grown, considering he had only been reincarnated into this world the day before recalling that his impressive level gain was due to his recent victory over a massive behemoth. Preparing for battle, Jinta drew his sword, offering a quiet apology to the young creature. Intense, blazing flames surged forth from his blade as he held it high. He felt reluctant to use violence against a young dragon, yet he knew he could not simply stand by and allow them to become its meal. He steeled his resolve to show no mercy against any threat to their safety. However, before he could strike, the young dragon suddenly lowered its head all the way to the ground, keeping its eyes fixed on Jinta. Confused by the unexpected posture, Jinta paused, wondering what the monster was trying to communicate. The dragon made an attempt to vocalize, but Jinta admitted that he did not understand the language of dragons. Looking directly into its eyes, he noticed that all traces of hostility had vanished entirely, leaving him puzzled as to what this sudden shift in behavior meant. From the upper floor, Rifua called out, asking if he had already lost the fight. Jinta voiced his disbelief at her pessimistic question, especially given that she was hiding safely on the second floor while he stood on the front lines. Rifua asked what was happening, noting how remarkably quiet the outside had become. Jinta called for her to come down and observe the situation for herself. Rifua descended the stairs and looked outside, voicing her utter amazement at the scene before her. She recognized the specific stance the young creature had assumed, explaining that this was the traditional pose a dragon takes when swearing absolute loyalty to a new master. Jinta expressed surprise at this revelation, and Rifua directed his attention to how the monster lay low against the dirt with its head fully lowered. She asked him how he had managed to achieve such a feat. Jinta admitted in all honesty that he had no idea how it had happened. Rifua speculated that when Jinta summoned fire onto his sword, the young elemental beast might have mistaken the flames for its own mother. Jinta dismissed the idea, feeling that such a misunderstanding was far too foolish to be true. Gazing down at the resting creature, Jinta pondered why a solitary baby dragon would be wandering alone in this specific part of the forest. He leaned in and gently asked the creature if it had lost its way and become separated from its family. The little dragon let out a soft, quiet sound in response. Watching the calm interaction between the young man and the beast, Rifua brought up the question of what they should ultimately do with their new visitor, noting that it seemed harmless and peaceful for the time being. Jinta agreed with her assessment. Looking closer at the gentle creature, Rifua remarked that it actually appeared quite adorable. Jinta concurred, prompting Rifua to excitedly ponder their next steps. Observing her enthusiastic reaction, Jinta realized that she desperately wanted to keep the dragon, wearing the exact expression of a young child begging to adopt a stray animal. Jinta suggested that it would likely be fine for them to care for the young beast temporarily until they could track down its real family. Rifua asked with excitement if he was truly being serious. Overjoyed by his approval, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around the dragon in a warm hug. Trying to hide her delight, she playfully claimed that she supposed they had no other choice, acting as though she was merely going along with Jinta's decision while agreeing to let the young dragon stay with them. With their new home base finally secured, Jinta declared that they could officially begin their lives as adventurers. Filled with enthusiasm, he cheered at the fresh start ahead of them, proudly running through their newfound provisions. Clothing, shelter, food, and even a dragon were all taken care of, leaving Jinta fully prepared for whatever adventures lay ahead. Upon opening his eyes to the light of the new morning, Jinta found himself lying in bed right beside Rifua, a sudden sight that immediately stirred confusion and curiosity within his mind. He lay there in quiet contemplation, carefully retracing the sequence of events that had unfolded during the previous day to make sense of the unusual situation. Yesterday had been quite busy, beginning with the meticulous task of cleaning and organizing the interior of their house, followed by an engaging trek into the surrounding dense forest to explore the untamed landscape alongside their newly befriended dragon. As night fell upon the forest, they made a surprising discovery about their dwelling. The residence contained only a single bed for both of them. Realizing the inconvenience, Jinta had initially offered to yield the bedroom entirely to Rifua and sleep on the living room sofa instead. However, Rifua had quickly intervened, pointing out the generous dimensions of the mattress and reassuring him that there was more than enough room for the two of them to share it comfortably. That suggestion had set Jinta's imagination running wild with dramatic expectations. He had jokingly resolved to hold her completely accountable for any awkwardness, even half expecting her to sleep without any clothing. Yet, the reality proved far less scandalous, as Rifua drifted off into a deep slumber almost the instant her head touched the pillow. Left alone with his racing thoughts, Jinta felt a quiet sadness wash over him in the dark, playfully lamenting how carelessly she seemed to toy with the innocent heart of a pure man before he, too, gradually surrendered to sleep. The peaceful silence was broken when Rifua finally stirred awake, her very first reaction being an urgent declaration of her overwhelming hunger. Anticipating her needs, Jinta had already arranged a fresh selection of vibrant wild fruits upon the table. The moment Rifua laid eyes on the spread, her eyes widened in complete amazement as she recognized the fruit as pinigos. She wondered aloud where he could have possibly gathered such a rare treat. Jinta explained that he had stumbled across them during his forest expedition the previous afternoon. He had noticed the little baby dragon enjoying the fruit with great enthusiasm, which prompted him to harvest a few extra pieces for themselves. Hearing this, Rifua inquired about the identity of this individual he referred to as Haichan. Jinta clarified that it was the name he had chosen for the young fire dragon, drawing direct inspiration from her fiery nature to create a fittingly simple moniker, a choice of name that Rifua secretly deemed utterly lacking in creativity. Shifting the conversation toward the tasks ahead, Jinta outlined his primary goal for the day, which involved taking a trip back toward the town of Hoenn. Upon hearing the destination, Rifua excitedly wondered if he was eager to return to try his luck with some gacha pulls. Jinta quickly dismissed the idea, clarifying that while they had been completely distracted by the excitement of acquiring their new house, they still had an important duty left unfulfilled. They were required to hand in an official report regarding the slaying of the mighty behemoth, which meant their first priority in town had to be a visit to the local adventurer guild. Rifua readily agreed with his reasoning, noting that if they intended to complete the errand today, they ought to embark on their journey without delay. She recalled their previous travel by carriage and pondered the distance, pointing out that traveling to the town on foot would take approximately half a day. As Jinta pondered the logistical challenge of the long walk, the baby dragon suddenly chimed in with expressive noises, using her tail to point toward her own back. The gesture seemed like a clear invitation, as if the young creature were enthusiastically offering to carry them both on her shoulders. When Jinta asked for confirmation, the dragon produced a cheerful sound that left no doubt about her affirmative response. Delighted by the convenient offer, Jinta smiled brightly, thrilled by the prospect of riding on the back of a majestic beast to reach their destination in record time. Rifua expressed her warm gratitude to the young dragon before climbing up onto her back alongside Jinta. Once both riders were securely seated, Jinta gave the command to head toward Hoenn, and the creature eagerly bounded forward to start their trip. To their great surprise, the dragon did not take to the skies. Instead, she sprinted across the ground at an astonishingly rapid pace. Realizing that the young beast was still incapable of flight, Jinta nevertheless thoroughly enjoyed the thrilling ride across the terrain. As they sped along the path, Rifua explained that because the little dragon was still in her infancy, she had not yet developed the specialized flight skills that come naturally with age, though she would certainly acquire them as she grew older. Jinta agreed, expressing a keen desire to witness the magnificent sight of the dragon soaring through the air when that day finally arrived. However, as the high-speed journey continued, Jinta noticed a sudden change in his companion and observed that Rifua was looking remarkably pale and unwell. Concerned for her comfort, he checked to see if she was holding up all right. Rifua offered a faint reassurance, admitting that the rough, bouncy motion of their swift ride was causing the pinigo fruit she had eaten earlier to uncomfortably fight its way back up her throat. Spotting the prominent main entrance of Hoenn town appearing in the distance, Jinta encouraged her to hold on just a little bit longer until they arrived at the gates. Upon reaching the settlement, the guards posted at the entrance were startled when Jinta approached to request permission for entry into the town. The sentries found themselves utterly terrified as the baby dragon stood beside the travelers, staring directly at them with an intense gaze. Jinta politely repeated his request to enter for a short while, but the guards refused to let them pass, their expressions completely frozen in panic due to the presence of the formidable creature. Recognizing that the dragon's intimidating appearance was the primary obstacle preventing their admission, Jinta accepted the situation without argument. Turning to the dragon, He offered a sincere apology and requested that she remain outside the town boundary to wait for their return. To keep her occupied, Jinta handed over another fresh pinigo as a treat, instructing her to display her absolute best behavior until they finished their business inside. The gate guards watched the exchange in utter disbelief, shocked to see a human giving explicit commands to a wild, draconic entity. When they questioned whether he was actually capable of controlling such a beast, Jinta modestly clarified that he did not possess complete control, though the dragon generally chose to cooperate with most of his simple instructions. The guard remained skeptical, openly wondering if a dragon possessed the mental capacity to comprehend human speech at all. Observing the creature's diminutive size, the sentry began to remark that the dragon must be extremely young and undeveloped. However, before the guard could finish his sentence, the dragon swiftly unleashed a burst of flame directly onto the man's head, setting his hair ablaze in an instant. The sudden singeing served as an immediate and painful confirmation that the young beast understood every single word spoken about her. As the panicked guard realized the creature's full comprehension, Jinta immediately turned to scold the mischievous dragon, firmly explaining that setting people's hair on fire was strictly forbidden behavior, while the young dragon merely beamed with an innocent, childlike smile. Continuing their walk down the bustling streets toward the guild, Rifua explained that dragons belong to an entirely different class of monsters, widely regarded as the ultimate natural enemies of humanity. Hearing this, Jinta finally understood why the entrance guards had reacted with such utter panic when the two of them brought a dragon straight to the city's front gates. He realized that even the smallest misstep with such a creature could easily plunge the entire town into chaos. Teasingly, Rifua accused him of simply trying to show off, claiming she saw right through his childlike antics. In response, Jinta playfully pinched her cheek before asking for exact directions to their destination. Rifua pointed out that the guild sat straight down the main street, conveniently located right next to the item gacha parlor. The mere mention of the parlor caused Rifua's mood to light up with excitement. Though when Jinta questioned her reaction, she quickly brushed it off as nothing. Smiling at her obvious enthusiasm, Jinta suggested that since they were already passing by, they might as well check out the parlor for a moment, to which Rifua casually pretended not to care either way. As they paused to inspect the promotional poster displayed outside the building, Jinta privately noted that the current lineup of prizes seemed significantly less impressive than usual. He silently suspected that his own past streak of constantly winning the grand prizes was the real reason behind the downgraded rewards. Their browsing was suddenly interrupted by the distinct sound of someone weeping softly nearby. Jinta initially assumed the sniffling came from Rifua, but she quickly denied it just as they both spotted a young girl crying alone a short distance away. Jinta wondered aloud why such a tiny girl would be coming out of a gambling establishment, to which Rifua noted that they would only find out by asking her directly. Approaching the child gently, Rifua introduced herself and asked for the girl's name. Wiping away her tears, the young girl introduced herself as Airly. When Rifua softly inquired about the source of her distress, Airly admitted that there was a specific prize inside that she desperately wanted to win, but no matter how many times she tried, she simply could not pull it. The overwhelming frustration brought Airly to tears once again, causing the empathetic Rifua to burst into tears alongside her, much to Jinta's exasperated amusement. Stepping in to guide the conversation, Jinta asked Airly to point out the exact item she was hoping to get. The young girl pointed directly toward an illustration on the poster displaying a grand weapon known as the mighty Bao Yuichi. When Jinta asked if the Bao was intended as a gift for someone, Airly shook her head and revealed that it actually belonged to her late father. Rifua gently asked if her father had accompanied her to town today, but Airly solemnly explained that he had been killed by a behemoth. Jinta pieced together the history of the heirloom, realizing this tragedy had occurred long before his own arrival in this world. Airly's father had valiantly faced the behemoth wielding the legendary Bao, but ultimately perished in battle. After his fall, the weapon was retrieved by a stray passerby and repeatedly traded from hand to hand over the years until it eventually ended up as a featured prize in the parlor's collection. Airly explained through her tears that after searching for her father's lost weapon for so long, she had finally tracked it down to this very spot. Deeply moved, Rifua instantly reassured the little girl, boldly declaring that her big brother Jinta would retrieve her father's Bao for her without fail. Surprised by the sudden promise, Airly looked up at Jinta, who pulled Rifua aside to quietly scold her for making such risky promises and building up the girl's expectations. He challenged Rifua on whether she was prepared to take responsibility if his polls came up empty. Unfazed, Rifua teased him back, asking if he was actually admitting defeat before even trying. Grinning with absolute confidence at the challenge, Jinta declared that the Bao was as good as won. Upon entering the dimly lit gacha hall, the trio was immediately acknowledged by the attentive clerk behind the counter, who recognized them as returning patrons and warmly noted their presence once more. A spirited determination filled the air as Rifua boldly announced her singular goal for the visit. Claiming the coveted grand prize, the legendary SR gold core design for the mighty Yoichi Bao, framing this attempt as her ultimate vengeance for her previous day's embarrassing string of failures. Airily looked up at her companion with wide, idolizing eyes, openly admiring her swagger and confidence, while Jinta stood nearby, expressing mild skepticism and surprise that Rifua was taking the lead once again. The initial burst of bravado dissipated almost instantly as the luck of the draw delivered a crushing string of duds, leaving Rifua holding a pathetic pile of useless junk that consisted of worn paper cups, a dirty old dishcloth, and a few empty glass bottles. Stunned by the utterly worthless results, Rifua loudly deflected her shame by claiming that the entire mechanism had to be glitched or rigged against her. Jinta stepped forward, offering to take over the drawing duties to spare them further disappointment. But Rifua stubbornly refused to step aside, pointing out that she still had a single final capsule remaining in her turn. When the last spherical prize tumbled out, it glowed with an azure hue, yielding a set of meal vouchers valued at 2,000 rin, her very first legitimate win after countless attempts. Overjoyed by this modest success, Rifua broke into a triumphant celebration, with young Airly joining in with pure, uninhibited delight over her friend's fortune. Jinta attempted to bring a sense of reality back to the group, pointing out that a handful of food tickets did not solve their primary objective, or get them any closer to the item they actually came to retrieve. Unfazed by his practicality, Rifua declared that her newfound prize would be put to immediate use on a feast of delicious treats, prompting Jinta to voice his confusion and slight dismay at being so casually left behind. Before departing, Airly paused to offer a warm word of encouragement, enthusiastically urging Jinta to give it his absolute best shot. Both Rifua and the young girl cheered him on in unison before heading out the door, leaving Jinta to offer a confident nod, a casual wink, and a cheerful thumbs up, assuring them that he had everything completely under control. Now alone inside the establishment, Jinta turned his attention back to the counter, mentally preparing himself to secure the objective swiftly so he could rejoin his companions. The clerk offered another polite greeting, but as Jinta approached, he noticed a strangely massive machine standing alongside the standard units, though he voiced a clear preference for sticking to a conventional model. The clerk casually insisted that the oversized apparatus was indeed a standard machine, prompting Jinta to point out the unmistakable, dramatic difference in size between the two units sitting side by side. A brief moment of awkward miscommunication ensued as the two clerks present misunderstood Jinta's visual comparison, momentarily misinterpreting his gestures toward the towering machine as an observation directed at their physical appearance. Setting the confusion aside, Jinta bluntly observed that the gargantuan vessel was obviously stuffed to the brim with useless filler items, openly questioning whether stocking a machine with such terrible odds was even permitted under local rules. The clerk calmly clarified that the extreme setup was a specialized security measure recently put into effect specifically to counter particular patrons who had previously attempted to exploit or cheat the venue system, politely thanking Jinta for his understanding of the strict business practice. Surprised by the extreme defense mechanism, Jinta absorbed the information while the clerk quietly anticipated that this overwhelming barrier would prompt the young man to give up and leave. While the assistant clerk felt a slight pang of guilt over the ridiculously rigged setup, Jinta ultimately viewed the absurd odds as a far better alternative than receiving an outright ban from the establishment. Reaffirming his resolve, Jinta announced his intent to play the massive machine regardless, startling the main clerk, who had fully expected him to turn around and walk away. He confirmed his decision and verified that the fee remained a standard 1,000 rin per attempt, leaving the assistant clerk inwardly cringing at his stubbornness, knowing full well that his chances of pulling anything worthwhile were virtually non-existent. She explicitly warned him that the machine contained over 5,000 dummy capsules, but Jinta simply asked whether a real winning prize was still hidden somewhere inside the massive pile. Upon receiving confirmation that a legitimate grand prize was indeed present within the mechanism, Jinta insisted on proceeding with the attempt, stating firmly that he now possessed a crucial reason that prevented him from backing down. Outside the venue, Rifua and Airly settled down near a peaceful public fountain, enjoying some cold ice cream in the fresh air. As they ate, Airly voiced a quiet concern regarding Jinta's status, asking whether he would truly be all right in such an unforgiving situation. Rifua reassured the young girl with effortless confidence, explaining that if Jinta possessed one reliable talent above all else, it was his uncanny luck with games of chance. Right on cue, the two spotted Jinta strolling toward them from the direction of the shop, prompting Airly to leap to her feet and run over to meet him with eager curiosity. Rifua called out to ask about the outcome of his attempt, to which Jinta dryly noted that he was likely no longer welcome inside the establishment, prompting Rifua to immediately press him for news regarding the grand prize bow. Without a word, Jinta produced the legendary weapon and presented it to young Airly, whose eyes widened in total disbelief as tears began to well up on the brim of her eyelids. Overcome with emotion, the young girl gently cradled the weapon, recognizing it instantly as the very bow that had once belonged to her father. Rifua looked on with a warm smile, sharing in the emotional moment and expressing how wonderful it was for the young girl to be reunited with her family heirloom. Airily nodded through her tears, pouring her heart into a sincere expression of gratitude to both of her older companions for making the impossible happen. With tears streaming down her face, she offered them a radiant, heartfelt smile before offering a final wave of farewell and setting off on her own journey home. As Jinta watched the small girl wander away into the distance, he voiced a lingering worry about her traveling unescorted, wondering how such a small child would survive the treacherous roads filled with dangerous monsters like goblins. Rifua quickly put his anxieties to rest, explaining that Airly's tender age was deceiving because she was an elf, a species boasting extraordinary natural talent in the magical arts, as well as exceptional innate skill with archery. She assured him that even a young girl from such a lineage possessed formidable combat prowess, easily standing among some of the most capable magic users in the entire world. Jinta let out a subtle smile of relief, quietly marveling at the incredible nature of elves as he absorbed the impressive fact. Turning the conversation back to their current situation, Rifua noted that their companion Haichan was still waiting for their arrival, suggesting that they ought to hurry along to their original destination. Jinta paused in his tracks and let out a playful sigh, noting that following her suggestion would make sense if their actual goal had been visiting the guild as originally planned. Stepping forward, he playfully pinched Rifua's cheeks in light-hearted punishment, teasingly reminding her that their actual mission for the day had certainly not been spending all their time playing games at the gacha hall.